Ms. Tracy first, then we'll get to you, Bill.
Even though I'm very pleased with a lot of the progress that you and Bert are making with staff responsibilities, there is one area where your administration appears more unresponsive even than Tom Holden's administration. In the area of after a public makes a comment on anything on the agenda or not on the agenda, Tom occasionally would say, Ms. Burnham, would you have somebody from staff talk to them in the hallway? But you have chosen not to do that. I would think that automatically Burnham would have her staff understand that when a member of the public speaks and asks for a response or an explanation, that the staff would automatically send that response either by email or telephone or meet him in the hallway. But none of that has ever happened with the staff or Ms. Burnham. And so it really feels to me like in some ways it's worse now since you're not directing her to give some response to the public.
Okay, well, I mean, that's very positive advice and criticism, very constructive, and I will be more attentive to that. That's number one. Number two is, one of the things, however, I do know is that, and this is a very difficult thing to vet out sometimes, but there are people that I work with, and I've worked with on a consistent basis, that have questions that are extremely time-consuming. I mean, they're very related. They're very, very detailed, number one. Sometimes they're not. Maybe they're very, very general in nature. Sometimes they don't know exactly what they want. And it's not the average person. The average person is asking a pretty much straightforward answer. And I think it's sometimes trying to be able to differentiate between some of those things that, again, the public deserves a response for that. But one of the things I have seen is that we are trying to make do with less. We're still trying to make do with less. And I see that it's very difficult to do what they have on their plate. But getting responses to the public is fair. But I will say that there are those that will consume. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've made jokes and said, you need one staff person just for that person to work with because the volume of their questions, the frequency of the questions, the magnitude of their questions are literally, they're hours and hours and hours and hours. And I don't know quite how to fix that issue, but I'm being very attentive. I think what it is this. I think maybe we could set a general rule and say, look, if you have one straightforward question that of the government, of the city manager and of the government, that clearly as mayor I could then direct the staff to say, and maybe we change the agenda to reflect that, as opposed to 30 questions. I got these 30 questions, and I mean I'm not going to name names or anything like that because that's ridiculous. But I've seen it because I get the correspondence, and there are like 30 questions.
On some of the items on the consent agenda that shows there's a lot of public interest, why can't you pull that off and maybe put it on the next agenda?
Well, I think part of what we've seen is that, and this is exactly this thing about the so-called rules committee, and this, it's the council agenda committee, is that we're seeing actually more issues coming to the council. I think overall, that's number one. There's just more business. That's number one. It's growing all the time, so it's not stagnant or it's not shrinking. It's growing. So that's number one. Number two, that means that even more issues are of more interest to the public. And I think part of this is, again, the Board of Supervisors, I mean, let's face it, we're on a level issue-wise that the Board of Supervisors was, say, 20, 30 years ago when my dad was first elected to the Board of Supervisors. And they spent from 8 to 4 o'clock. They spent 8 hours, one time a week. We have designated half that time to do that. And so that's been the trick, Bill, is I agree with you. But there's so many issues of interest, and now that I think that Councilman Perello is on the City Council, because he's been at it longer, Bert's been at it, arguably longer than all the council members combined. I mean, I've been at it, right? So he has the experience, and now that he's on the City Council, there are questions coming from all over the place on a variety of issues, and it's not that that's not unhealthy. That's a very, very healthy sign. The problem is, how do you manage it in the time frame? We have basically, we have set aside 32 hours a month for council business when it's probably 50. And so how do you do that and not exclude the public? So when you're talking about taking something off the info consent item, I think part of the other thing that the Rules Committee wants to do is it wants to be expeditious, reasonably expeditious, in making sure that things are deliberated and they move forward. And I think sometimes that's a trick. That's a very delicate thing. So I'm listening, and I've heard Eileen's comments about trying to direct staff, and maybe there's something I can say at the very beginning before public comments, that if there is a specific question that a member of the public has, then we have a staff member that can address that. If not, this is kind of interesting. If not, then you will email the staff, and then if I'm hearing that the staff isn't even responding to emails, and then you come back to me and say, well, we're not even getting back to you. But I think one of the things that would be nice for the public to know, maybe this is a compromise, is to say, if you have one specific question that you would like to ask of staff this evening, outside the council chambers, okay, ask it during public comment, and a member of the staff then will be appointed to answer that question. If they can't, then we need to set a reasonable time period to get them an